Good morning from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. I'm coming to you this morning because last night we failed to videotape our Wednesday evening Lenten service, and we wanted to provide at least part of it to you this morning, those of you who wish to communicate with us and connect with us online. Last night I began our homily by reading the beginning of a story found in John chapter 9. The first few verses from John chapter 9 are this. As he walked along, Jesus saw a man born blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him." The ending of the story concludes with the last 4 verses of chapter 9. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that I say to you, we see, your sin remains." The gospel of our Lord. You may want to take a look at John chapter 9 if you don't recall this story, but as the story unfolds, there's a series of arguments about this man, some arguments to his face, saying, "You can't be the man. How can you be the man once born blind? How can this person have healed you?" And really what they're saying is that how can you be like one of us? How could any one person change you from the way you were to be like us? It began with the neighbors, claiming this could not be the man born blind, and they were choosing to focus on maybe he sinned or his parents sinned, that he was that way. The Pharisees enter the picture, and they too refuse to believe that this person could have been restored to the community that they were a part of. The Jews in the community came and did the same thing, again, refusing to believe that this person could be restored by this man, Jesus, to be a part of this community. Even this man's parents were afraid to agree to the possibility that this man, their son, could be restored to the community. You see, the community had a history of keeping people distanced. They kept lepers at bay in leper communities. They allowed the lame to lay beside the roadsides and beg. They allowed the blind to remain helpless. They were hesitant to include these people who were different from them in these ways into their community. In their own ways, they were discriminating against these people because of a difference. They were choosing to see only their differences and refusing to see this person and other people as part of their group, as part of them. But this discriminating nature soon turned into discrimination, which means that they began to hold on to power in this difference. Their power was exercised by refusing to believe that this person could be part of their community. More so, refusing to believe that this man, Jesus, could change this man or change them so that this person could be part of their community. Overturning this system of difference and holding power were what Jesus was trying to get at when he says that the works of God might be revealed in this story of the blind man now made to see. they had a history to maintain. They had a history of holding some people at bay, outside their community, and they had a history of holding this power over those people. We have a history too. We have a history of privilege and ingrained prejudices and power over others that we are maintaining as a society. Last Wednesday, I shared with you my awakening to see how I had particular privileges when going to a bank to borrow money. Privileges that my friends who have pigment in their skin color do not have. And as I talked with those friends and colleagues about these differences, the only difference we could find in our makeup, as far as the banks were concerned, was the pigment, the amount of pigment in our skin. Tonight, I am humbly and honestly admitting to you that I am a racist. I know that's a shocking statement to make, but let me tell you what that means. It does not mean that I'm a bigot. It does not mean that I'm a white supremacist. But I am racist because I am part of a greater system that continues to hold people at a distance, to keep people out of their circles, to define people as different based on what we now call race. Furthermore, I benefit in systems of power that keeps this division apparent and alive. You take that distancing or that privilege or that prejudice, keeping people separate, and combine that with power that is exercised to give one group of people authority. You combine those two, and you end up with racism. As an individual who benefits in all of that, I have to call myself a racist. It's a humbling thought because I do not disparage people of color. I have friends, I befriend them. I don't treat them any differently than I would treat other friends. And yet I'm a racist because I participate in a culture that keeps people apart and maintains power over them. How did we get here? How did we get to a time and place when skin color makes such a difference? Now, I know we try many things to lessen those differences, but still, even on any official document that we fill out or sign, such as the census form or a questionnaire, we are often asked, what race do you identify with? What race you identify with? I think we need to ask questions about that question. To my surprise, I learned that racial distinction is not as old as creation. Even though people have had different skin colors throughout all time, racial distinctions have not been as pronounced as they are now. In fact, what we experience now is only about 325 years old, dating back to the year 1795, when German scientist Johann Blumenbach, in his large laboratory, was surveying the specimens of human skulls that he had been studying and collecting from around the world. He set apart a particular skull, a skull of a woman that was a skeleton that was found in the area of Caucasus in Europe. He identified this skull as more beautiful than all the others, more perfect than all the others. His determination was very likely determined by his reflection. He could see in that skull the same smooth forehead that perhaps he had, the same structure and shape of jaw that he saw every morning in the mirror. He called it the Caucasian skull and decided single-handedly to call attention to all other skulls as less desirable. Quoting him, he said, "This is the most exemplary of skulls, and all other are only deviations from this Caucasian skull." Ever wonder where the term Caucasian came from? Certainly not a biblical term. It's a term that is only a little over 300 years old. And we use that to self-identify. And because of that, identifying that as a race, all other skull shapes, consequently skin colors, are identified as some other race. I want to share with you that in August of 2013, I and about 1,000 other ELCA Lutherans met together in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for what we call the ELCA Churchwide Assembly. This is a legislative and business meeting of sorts that's held every 3 years. And selecting voting members from the ELCA congregations from across the country is done specifically to put people there from all over the country. The purpose, of course, is to be the legislative body where resolutions are introduced, where ballots are formed and votes are taken for the leadership of our church. At this particular assembly, one of the matters of business was to review and perhaps adopt a social statement on criminal justice. This had been presented by a study group that had studied for years on a particular problem, and they wanted this social statement to be reviewed and perhaps approved. The main point of this social statement was this: to call upon members of our nationwide church through prayer and ministry efforts to accompany and advocate on behalf of those whose lives are caught up in or committed in service to the criminal justice system. A social statement created for our church body to give consideration to in our time of prayer and in our time of ministry together, to be aware of what the study group has discovered happening in our American criminal justice system. When open discussion began, the focus immediately went to a sentence found on line 977 of 1,238 total lines in a 43-page resolution. That one sentence was this: black people have been far more likely than white people to be arrested for drug offenses. Now, I want you to hear that this debate on this sentence continued for almost 2 hours. The nature or the fact of this sentence was not being debated. We all know that there's an inordinate number of people of color sentenced for drug offenses than there are people of no color. That was not being contested. What was being spoken to was the issue of calling people either black or white. How do we want to name people? How do we want to designate the people of color who are being incarcerated at higher levels than white people? Speakers quickly lined up at the microphones, as they do in these types of assemblies, to debate the issue. An amendment was forwarded immediately to this social statement, and the amendment was to change that one sentence to read like this: strike black people, replace it with African Americans, have been far more likely likely than strike white people, add Caucasian, to be arrested for drug offenses. Attention giving to what we call people. Giving attention to the dividing of races is what was happening. Well, the conversation and the debate continued, and it was very interesting to hear the different things said about how we should be naming each other. However, there was no debate, not one question called to the attention of being called Caucasian. That was fine. But the question was about what do we call and how do we name people of color? This seemed to be very important to this assembly of 1,000 people, 95% of which were white. The conversation was interesting in a lot of ways, and one amendment after another was lifted up, changing black people to African Americans, but changing that then to people of color, and that wasn't right. So we changed it to a person's descent. And I was very interested as a white person because I want to be not only politically correct, but just appropriate in addressing my friends and acquaintances and even people I don't know appropriately, or talking about people I don't know who have pigment in their skin. What is appropriate for me to call them? Objections continued. The next name was persons of African descent, which that was debated because there are 50 different countries and hundreds of ethnic groups in Africa. Perhaps we need to talk about, use the term ethnic minorities, or Americans of ethnic descent, or persons of mixed descent, or even non-Caucasian. Did I say this debate went on for almost 2 hours? It was getting close to noontime, and a gentleman from the Montana Synod said that he felt the assembly was in agreement about the problem, but the issue at hand is so broken in our society that we cannot agree on the language to describe people of color. It dawned on me we had no problem deciding what to call all the pink people in the room. They were decidedly white. They were decidedly Caucasian. Why was that not debated? It wasn't debated because those are the people that hold the power. Those are the neighbors, the Pharisees, the Jews in that community that Jesus healed this blind man who were saying, no, he can't be like one of us. We're not questioning our identity. It's the identity of that person that is in question. What do we call him now? All of those amendments and the amendments to the amendments failed. And the resolution to adopt the social statement passed as originally worded because we didn't know how to handle the question. The session ended at about lunchtime, to which I went to lunch along with these other 1,000 people. We crossed over from one large assembly hall over to another assembly hall set for lunch. Tables set for about 1,000 people. And at the beginning of this 5-day assembly, we were instructed that whenever we went for breakfast or lunch in that assembly hall, that we would sit down with people we don't know. A way of getting to know other people. A way of creating conversation outside our close circle of friends and acquaintances. So I grabbed my box lunch and I went to a table. I didn't know anybody at this table, and I sat down and immediately introduced myself to the people around the room, around the table, as other people did to me. But I noticed that I was sitting next to a woman quite a bit older than I, who had a significant amount of pigment in her skin coloration. And I began to wonder, well, what kind of conversation are we going to have after that debate? And what are we going to talk about at this lunch conversation. What was going through my mind, first of all, was, I wonder how she got here. What role would she have in a Lutheran church? What leadership role would she have that she would be elected to be here as a delegate? Of course, I had these thoughts about, okay, where in the United States will there be ELCA churches with enough people of color that they would elect her as a delegate? You see what happens to our thinking? We introduced ourselves more closely to find out that she was the president of a 3,000-member congregation in Columbus, Ohio. I wasn't thinking that. I was back there in that white majority, holding power, making assumptions over people with pigment in their skin coloration. We compared our locations, had kind conversations about the weather in Columbus, Ohio, and in southern Minnesota. She was very friendly, and I hope I was friendly to her. And then she broke the ice. She asked me, why did we have that long debate over what to call other people with color in their skin? Why are we having conversations about this race or that race? Why are we designating people by race, by skin color? Why are we making these distinctions? Why are we making discriminating comments? Discrimination, setting somebody aside because of a difference and then maintaining a certain power or control. She went on to say, for me, and I would hope for other people who are followers of Christ and people who read the Bible, would recognize that in all of creation, God created humankind. He created the human race. And she looked at me and she says, that's one race. Why do we think there are more than one race of people? I humbly have to admit, my racism showed. It wasn't bigotry, it wasn't white supremacy, but just being part of a quiet system that maintains power and control in a discriminating manner is called racism. And I benefit from that as a white person. I'm humbled by that. And I bring that to my confession this Lent. And I'm very thankful to God who sent his Son so that in a living and active belief in him, recognizing the inclusive nature of Jesus, that perhaps I and others, we all can see through these pretenses that we hold, to see the grace of God that created only one human race and loves all of them into that one human race created in his image. I close by reading the end of that story, but from the translation called The Message from Eugene Peterson. Hear these words. Jesus then said, I came into the world to bring everything into the clear light of day, making all the distinctions clear, so that those who have never seen will see, and those who have made a great pretense of seeing will be exposed as blind. Some Pharisees overheard him and said, does that mean you're calling us blind? Jesus said, if you were really blind, you would be blameless. But since you claim to see everything so well, you're accountable for every fault and failure. the gospel of our Lord. Thanks be to God.